Today we'll be talking about how to be a competitive or successful applicant for master's or applied programs. So today you'll be hearing from lots of great panelists, and I will introduce them to all of you all in just a moment. And again, what we'll be talking about today is what will help to make you a competitive applicant for these master's programs. And so we have some specific questions that we'll ask each of our panelists. So these are panelists who will be joining us today. We have representatives from 4 different programs at UNCC, and these are programs that typically are sort of popular programs that our psychology majors may go on to pursue. So we have Ms. Alaniva from the Social Work Master's Program. We have Dr. Gaultney from the Master's Program in Psychology. We have Dr. Merlin-Knoblich from the Master's in Counseling Program. And then we have Dr. Shanock from the Industrial Organizational Psychology MA program. And so when you hear from each of them today, keep in mind, of course, some of the information that they share may be specific or tailored to UNCC or their program at UNCC. But the idea is that what they share can also kind of give you an insight on, for example, Dr. Gaultney for master's in psychology programs in general. So this isn't necessarily specific to these programs at UNCC, but is hopefully going to give you a good sort of idea of, if I'm interested in master's in social work programs, what are things that I need to be, getting under my belt or having to be a competitive applicant. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the panelists. And panelists, we'll just kind of go, I have you in alphabetical order. So we'll just start with Ms. Alaniva, then Dr. Gaultney, Dr. Merlin-Knoblich, and Dr. Shanock for each of our questions. So the first one is just having you all introduce yourself. So tell us a little bit about you and about the program that you represent. And again, Ms. Alaniva, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
All right, wonderful. So thank you for having me. My name is Bridget Alaniva. I'm the project coordinator of student outreach and engagement for the School of Social Work. So I do all kinds of recruitment activities. I do a lot of outreach with our current and prospective students. So if you ever have any questions about the program and you ever email our admissions team, I will very likely be the person to reach back out to you. So I'm here representing the Master of Social Work program. Our program is known as an advanced generalist program. So that means we don't really have any specific concentrations, but we do have an emphasis on social justice as a running theme throughout our courses. So overall, it is a very well-rounded social work program. So you learn a lot of different perspectives. Overall, we have about 190 students in the MSW program. We do have 3 different plans of study. We have a 1-year, 2-year, and a 3-year online. So we do have, different tracks for that, but overall we have just under 200 MSW students. And for students who should apply, if you're interested in really helping people to any capacity. So if you're interested in working with vulnerable populations or topics such as juvenile justice, homelessness, immigration services, child welfare, school social work, long-term care facilities, if you're interested in older adults and families, if you're interested in a private practice, working in hospitals, disadvantaged communities, anything along those lines, if one of those stood out to you or if something else does, if you have any interest in those kinds of things, those are the people that we're looking for. We're looking, for people who are passionate about social justice and, have a little bit of a background into the human services field. So that's our social work program.
Thank you. And Dr. Gaultney, you'll be next.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me to join you. Our master's program, I'm not sure how representative it is of master's programs in psychology in general, because we do put quite a bit of emphasis on research. Our students most typically go from the master's program into a PhD program. Not always, but many of them do. And we put a heavy emphasis on research. We expect people to be involved in research right from the beginning of their program. We do have a research thesis requirement. Other master's programs are going to be much more applied in nature, are much more general. I guess the take-home message from that is to know the program where you're applying, understand what it is they can do and can't do, and make sure that when you apply, you look like a good match for what they do.
All right, thank you so much. And Dr. Merlin-Knoblich, you'll be next.
Thanks. I think that was great advice, probably relevant for all of our programs to find the right match. I'm Clare Merlin-Knoblich. It's so nice to be with you all this afternoon. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling, which is actually part of the College of Education. And I have been with the university since 2015. This year, I started directing our Master's in Counseling program. We have 3 concentrations in the program. The first is school counseling. So applicants for that concentration are drawn to working with children and adolescents in the school setting. In particular, it helps if they are open to working with students and supporting them when it comes to social emotional problems, academic problems, and supporting their career development, and using a range of different tools. So school counselors do individual counseling, but they also use group counseling, or they do classroom lessons to both be proactive and reactive when necessary to support students. The second and by far most popular concentration is our clinical mental health counseling concentration. Applicants who are drawn to that area want to be clinical mental health counselors, or what we used to call community counselors. So they want to work in private practices or hospitals or agency settings, supporting people who are experiencing what we consider developmentally normal life challenges, but that perhaps need a counselor to talk out those concerns, to build a relationship with, so over time they can grow and develop personally. And then the third concentration is addictions counseling. That one is a little bit easier for folks to understand. Addictions counselors work with people who are experiencing addictions or often substance abuse problems. I tell applicants, if you think that you might spend any part of your career working in addiction counseling, it's probably in your best interest to pursue the addictions concentration, because it contains all of the same requirements as the clinical mental health concentration, and can lead to the same sort of licensure. But obviously, if you just focus on clinical mental health, you don't get the addictions components. On average, I'd say we have about 200 students in the program each year total. We accept between 70 and 100 per year. And students should apply if they want to be practitioners. So if they want to become a licensed professional school counselor, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, or a licensed clinical addiction specialist.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Shanock.
Hi, I'm Dr. Linda Shanock, and I'm happy to see you all. I'm with the Industrial Organizational Psychology Master's Program. So, you know, a lot of times when people go into psychology, they think about helping people in the kinds of ways that a lot of the previous presenters have talked about, but a lot of times people haven't necessarily heard about IO psychology. It is about applying psychological theories and principles to the workplace. So the focus of our program is very applied, and it's really training future IO working professionals to work in consulting or human resources or related fields. So everything from, you know, selecting employees, how to do that well, how to, you know, develop our future leaders, how to manage the talent that you have in your organization. Organizations make decisions all the time, and we want them to be able to learn how to help the organizations make data-driven decisions. That's very important. So statistics and measurement, psychometrics are all important in our program. We're much smaller. It's amazing to hear how big some of these programs are. We typically have about 15 to 30 students in the program at any time. And the students who should apply to this are people who are interested in, you know, if you've kind of always been fascinated by the workplace or by human resources types of issues. You know, again, it runs the whole gambit from before the employees even start to after they're there, how to, you know, how to help organizations and how to help employees, adult employees in the workplace, basically.
Great, thank you all. So hopefully this gives everyone an idea of what some of these different programs offer and what kind of a general overview of what you might cover or what the focus is of these programs. So next we'll get into some specific questions. And so our first one is a pretty broad or general question about, you know, what are the most important things or factors that I should have if I want to be competitive for that program? And again, we'll just go in the same order.
Okay, so for the Master of Social Work program, I would say the top 3 things that are most important factors of being a competitive applicant would be the experience or the resume that you submit, having a strong essay, and solid recommendations. So starting with the experience, it's really important to show that you have evidence of some sort of passion or desire to be in the field of social work. And this is true for, obviously any graduate application, but specifically for social work, we really do look for, whether that's campus involvement in an organization, community involvement through volunteering. Maybe you have a job at, some location within the human services field, or it could be an internship, any kind of evidence showing your passion. We're not looking for you to have a full-time job and dedicate all your time to one thing, but we do like to see that, students who are applying to our program do have some sort of experience to show that they do want to be a social worker to some capacity. So moving on to the essay. So for our statement of purpose, we have a whole list of prompts that we do like applicants to address. But in addition to answering the prompts, we also do look at the writing itself, which is very important to us. Writing is a huge part of our Master of Social Work program. So in addition to, having that experience and incorporating that into your answers, it is also important for us to see, how well you write and how well you can incorporate some social work terminology, or, what is your understanding of social work when we kind of ask those questions, because they vary from the prompts. You can look it up on our website, but they vary in things such as, why select our program to, why social work. So we do kind of want to make sure that our applicants do have a broad understanding of social work before being admitted to the program. And thirdly, for the recommendations, it really is important to have recommenders who know you well, because that does tell a lot, whether it's a professor, supervisor, mentor, employer, whoever it is important for them to check that, I know them very well button on the recommendation form, because that shows that, they did have an impact on you. You did make that effort to reach out to them throughout, throughout your undergraduate education, or, volunteering or working or whatever it was. But it does show that, within that letter of support, that these people who, should be within the human services field, whether they be professors or whatever they are, it does help us to see that others who are professionals in their field feel that you could be successful at our graduate program and as a social worker. So those three things, again, the essay, having good recommendations, and experience are really the most important factors in being a competitive applicant.
I would have to agree with Bridget. Writing skill is the lifeblood of graduate school. You must be able to write. So all that time you labored through research methods too, you were actually acquiring some skills that can be very valuable. You can put those on your Vita and sell those as strengths, things that you've developed in your undergraduate experience. We're a fairly small program because I can only accept people for whom a faculty member has agreed to supervise their research. So that automatically keeps our numbers down. We have maybe 24 or so, the number kind of waxes and wanes. So I would say the number one thing that we're looking for is undergraduate research experience. So have you volunteered to work in somebody's lab on a research project? What research skills have you learned? How has that helped shape your research interests that you would like to pursue in the master's program? Along that line, it's really important to develop some sort of relationship with a few faculty members with whom you would like to work. People can reach out to those faculty members in advance and say, here's my research interest. Here's why I think it might be a good match with yours, and develop a relationship so that you can then ask them if they would be willing to supervise you in the master's program. A third thing would be some sort of evidence that you will be successful in graduate classes. Historically, that's been GRE scores and GPA, and those do give us information. They're not the only criteria. You can have another way of presenting yourself as academically strong and ready to succeed in graduate studies. And finally, it's important to have supportive letters. We probably put more emphasis on letters from academics, people who have seen you work in the classroom. In psychology, that often ends up being your research methods to instructor, or perhaps your senior seminar instructor, someone who's had the chance to see your skills and get to know you a bit. So that's 4 things that would be important for our program.
So for the Masters in Counseling program, much of what's been shared is, of course, also relevant recommendations. The statement of purpose is really important. I would add that at UNC Charlotte, for example, we also, like the social work program, have an intentional emphasis on multiculturalism and social justice. And so it's important in our program that applicants speak to this focus. It's in our prompt for our statement of purpose. We don't expect for applicants to know it all or have it all figured out. We don't have it all figured out when it comes to social justice, but we want them to be aware that that's a program emphasis. And we want them at least to take an attempt at addressing, why they might be drawn to that topic. So even if you're applying to a counseling program that doesn't focus on social justice, it would help to find out, well, what is their program emphasis and how can I speak to this? I would also say it's important to have clear life experiences that are somewhat related to counseling, and in particular, the population that you think you want to counsel. And if you hear life experiences, you might think, well, I'm applying straight out of college. How do I gain that experience without taking a break? But we certainly make a point to notice, even for our students coming straight from college, what volunteer experience did they have? What organizations were they involved in? Maybe what part-time work experience did they have during college? And I encourage applicants to try and seek out opportunities that are, again, relevant to the population they want to counsel. So if you want to be a school counselor, maybe you volunteer working with children. Or if you want to be an addictions counselor, maybe you volunteer, at a local substance abuse clinic. Or if you want to work with a particular adolescent population, whether you're drawn to supporting people experiencing grief and loss, or maybe those with disabilities, any sort of experience with those populations stands out. And then I'll be honest, the third factor that matters, I really noticed this year, was GPA. And we're going to retool our admissions process a bit next year to try and favor life experiences just as much, if not more, than GPA. But I'll be honest, we had a record year for applications, and almost all of the applicants had strong life experiences. Almost all of them had good statements of purpose. And so that GPA ended up being the defining factor, between some higher ratings for applicants than others. So in particular, if you're still a junior, you still have some time to make sure you get the best grades you can.
So I'll echo a lot of what my colleagues said, and I'm actually going to speak a little bit more broadly to applying to IO master's programs more generally, because ours is a little bit different, and ours is very competitive like the other programs. We get a lot of applications for just a few slots. So, it's good, I think, in general, when you're applying to grad schools, not to get your heart set on one particular program, but to really open your mind and think broadly about what programs you would want to apply to, maybe outside of Charlotte or elsewhere. Anyway, so as for IO master's programs generally, I would say that we are backing away from requiring test scores, at least on a pilot basis. We have decided to waive our GRE scores as a program on a pilot basis for fall of 2022, the next admission cycle. And I think that a lot of master's programs and maybe PhD programs too are starting to do that and focus more on holistic review. But that said, to echo, what Dr. Merlin, sorry, just said was that, we have to use sometimes a first cut. And so GPA is somewhat important. That's one quantitative measure that we can use. But other things that we value, not just in our program, but across the US and IS psychology programs are, have you had a class or how well did you do in your research methods classes? How well did you do in your statistics class or classes? Do you have an idea of what IO psychology is? You don't have to take a class in it, but just can you show in your statement of purpose or in something that you kind of have an idea of what you're getting into? Why would you want that particular program? I would say that's in the statement of purpose. It's really important to talk about why you would want to be part of that program. A lot of IO master's programs will require research experience because they'll be a research oriented, kind of thesis oriented master's. Ours is applied, so we value work experience more. We actually target working professionals who've been out of school for a while as our target population, but we do accept some students right out of undergrad. So we're looking for like data analytics skills, at least basic ones that you might have accumulated either on the job or in college through stats or methods, some writing skills and kind of a knowledge of work experience. We value work experience, but some will value research experience, and then kind of a working knowledge of it, at least like, kind of what IO psychology is and what you're getting into.
Wonderful. It's so interesting just to see all the similarities that our panelists have shared and some, some differences depending on the program types. So next we'll get into the questions coming from this point forward will be a little bit more specific. So we'll have some that like even this one here about how important are GPA and GRE that some of our panelists have already touched on. So panelists, when we get to you with these questions, if you feel like you've already touched on it, you can just kind of say that or just add a little bit from what you shared earlier. So again, we'll start back at the beginning, and this time we're talking about GPA and GRE scores and what should students do or what can they do if they have lower scores or maybe lower than they would want to have for GPA or GRE scores.
All right, so for the Master of Social Work program, we usually look for applicants with a GPA of a 3.0 or higher, but we do review all applications regardless of GPA. So and we do admit students. It really just, again, does really depend on experience and other factors of the application. For example, if we have a student with a 2.8 GPA, but they have fantastic experience and recommendations, that is something that we take into consideration because we know that, sometimes experience does outweigh the GPA. But unfortunately, it may not reflect that in the score. But if we do see something, that is outstanding in another part of the application, that is something that we will look at instead and, kind of check the references and your resume and see that everything kind of fits together. And that's when, a score may improve for someone who doesn't have as high of a GPA. We don't require the GRE anymore. So we actually got rid of that last year. So we don't require any test scores, but if you want to take them, we do have a lot of applicants who do choose to take the GRE and still submit their scores to us. We will kind of take that and replace it if your scores meet our standards. Those are on our website as well for the, what percentile we look for. But other than that, we don't, like I said, we don't require you to take the GRE, but if you feel that it could improve your GPA score by, kind of canceling each other out, then that is something that you may want to consider. If you do have a low GPA or a low test score, if you decided you wanted to take the GRE and you still didn't score really high, again, I would encourage you to get some more experience. Volunteering of any kind is a way to boost that. Sometimes we do recommend students to kind of wait a graduation, wait an admission cycle, and maybe you gain some experience and have a job or internship and volunteer a lot. Maybe that also includes taking a post-baccalaureate class. We can't guarantee admission, even if you take one of our own MSW electives as a post-baccalaureate class, which is basically, you just take one of our electives. Even though you would be taking a class in our MSW program, that wouldn't guarantee admission, but it would show us that you would be able to handle a graduate level program if you did have a lower GPA or test score. So again, if you are kind of in this situation where you're not sure about your GPA and you may not want to take the GRE or anything like that, I know a lot of other MSW programs in the area are getting rid of the GRE or have already. So this may be the same situation for other MSW programs that you may be looking to apply to. But again, just experience is really kind of the only way to make up for a lack of GRE in the score. So
the master's program does still at this time look at GRE and grade point average. The graduate school has a sort of a rule of thumb that the floor levels for consideration for a master's program would be a GPA of 3.0 and a minimum GRE of the 30th percentile. Partly it depends on who else has applied that year and how good a match are you with somebody who is taking a master's student that year. I have accepted people who had GRE scores lower or grade point average a little bit lower because we try to look at a bigger picture. Maybe they have, maybe they're going to school or taking a test in a second language. We try to factor that in. Maybe their grades aren't the best, but we see that they have volunteered in somebody's lab and they have done presentations at professional conferences, maybe in some cases even been a co-author on a publication. So, or shown leadership in something that is relevant to the area you want to study. So we don't have a hard and fast rule about grade point average and GRE. They're informative. But we will also take other things into consideration. If you don't have the GPA that you think would be competitive, one option would be to come back as a post-bac and take some additional psychology classes. For example, it's not unusual for people to have done poorly in their first year of college while they got used to maybe the freedom or the responsibilities of being in college, but then they improve. You can show that you are now a much more mature student by taking some additional psychology classes and doing well. You can talk with an instructor of a graduate class, and if they give permission, you can take their class as a post-baccalaureate. If you show us that you can do very good work in a graduate level class, then that's going to weigh a lot as in comparison to a single score.
I would say the counseling master's program is very similar to those that have just been described. We voted about a year and a half ago to eliminate the GRE or MAT, so that is not required, and many other programs in counseling are doing the same. If you have a low GPA, I would encourage you to reach out to the program director and ask if it's still worth applying, because you want to know, do they have a hard cutoff and you'll just be wasting an application fee if you apply, or at UNC Charlotte, we don't. So I do tell students, even if they have lower than a 3.0, yes, you can still apply, but I encourage them to tell a compelling story about maybe what contributed to that lower GPA, help us understand why, in spite of it, they'll still be successful academically in our program. And just anything else they can do to show their potential contributions to our program could help overcome a lower GPA.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same. I mean, I talked about this a little bit already, but we also don't have a hard and fast rule other than the graduate schools 3.0 cutoff, but we have asked for, we have to ask for an exception if we want to admit somebody. We have to ask permission from the grad school, all of us do, to admit somebody who has a GPA below 3.0, but we have done it in the past. Again, like just echoing what everybody else said, if there's a compelling story about, gosh, I just really messed up my first year, or I had a death in the family, or I, whatever, just be honest and transparent about what happened. And if you can show, it's better to show success later, in the recent years than it was to show success early and then you tanked, I mean, unless something happened in your life, I mean, that could come up, but to show us some evidence that you can be successful, if it's not a GPA or a GRE, but like they said, tell a compelling story, get some experience, in our case, work experience, to show that you can do a lot of the things that we're asking you to do, but in your job. So you might be writing or doing data analysis or something like that in your job. And then, that can serve as evidence, or take a class. I had a student call me recently who's been out of school for about 20 years and wants to come back for the master's. And she said, you know what, I'm going to be honest, I did terrible as an undergrad. I just hadn't found myself. And she's taking some post-bac types of, just undergraduate actually classes, retaking some of them now to refresh her skills. And I think that's great. Not everybody can do that. That's okay. We're not asking everybody to do that, but it is good if you can either boost your GPA or do some other form of experience that shows us you can be successful.
All right. So this next one is, are there specific courses that you want an applicant to have completed? And so this, I think, maybe also touches on, do you have a requirement, for example, that someone majored in a certain, field or whatever to apply to the master's program?
So for the Master of Social Work program, we don't have any prerequisite courses or anything like that that we require for our students. The only exception is for our advanced standing program, which is our 1-year plan of study. This one, students have to have a bachelor's of social work earned within the last 7 years. So unless a student has that BSW degree, they would not qualify for that 1-year advanced standing program. But for everyone else with pretty much any other degree, we do prefer those to be within the liberal arts field. So, psychology, human services, branching to communications and, child and family development, everything like that. Those are the ones that we typically look for. But if someone does have completely different experience, again, if they can show evidence that they've worked elsewhere or had an internship, that's a different story. But for the most part, we accept applications from pretty much any background education-wise, and we don't have any specific courses because our students start out with the foundation year of the program, which pretty much does an introduction to social work, knowing that a lot of our students don't come straight from a BSW program. So we do kind of build them into the program. So no prerequisites or anything like that.
We, on the other hand, do have prerequisites. You do not necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I would say most of the applicants do, but I've also had a few that came from other disciplines. However, regardless of your bachelor's degree, you need to have taken undergraduate intro to psych, statistics, research methods. I think it's a total of 18 hours in psychology courses. So some people get that and as an undergraduate, others have to go back as a post-bac and get some of those classes.
In the counseling program and in most counseling programs, there are no prerequisites. We welcome applicants from all majors, although certainly many of us majored in psychology.
Similar in the IO psychology master's program, we don't have any prerequisites per se or a required degree, although we love it if you show that you've done well in methods and stats. That can be in any field. It doesn't have to be in psychology, but again, psychology is a science, and we in IO, we're trying to do evidence-based management in organizations. So that's, it's kind of important to us. So if you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. But we love to see those B's and A's in methods and stats.
All right, our next question is kind of about what experiences should applicants have. And I think that you all have kind of touched on this a bit already, but if you want to elaborate on that any more about experiences, and then also as a question, how important is research experience? And again, I think we've already heard a little bit from each of the programs, where this might be more important than others.
So for the Master of Social Work program, again, experience in the human services field in some way. So a lot of our students in our MSW program and others, they are from, they do have a psychology undergraduate degree. It is very, very closely related to social work if you kind of move from one focus to the next. So a lot of the, undergraduate internships that psychology students have do overlap with kind of what we're looking for. So any, research experience you can get as a psychology student, that is valuable. We don't really require any research experience, though it is helpful. We do have a few core classes that are research focused in our MSW program. So it definitely does help to have that experience. if not for the application, just when students are taking the course. So it's not, I guess it does give you an advantage if you have some sort of research experience, but other experience can be just as valuable. But we do like to see leadership in some way, and that doesn't necessarily mean being the president of a student organization. That could be reading one of your letters of recommendation and seeing that one of your professors kind of singled you out as being a, very engaged student, someone who is leading the classroom, class groups. So we do like to see some evidence of leadership because that does speak volumes in social work. And then volunteering, whether that's on campus or in the community, that really is social work kind of in its own way, no matter what it really is. So we love to see volunteering experience. It could be, like I said, really anything, but that is something that we look for. So, if you are looking to apply for, for next year or, whatever year you are looking to start an MSW program, I would just encourage you to get as much volunteering as you can, especially if, you're looking to go straight from undergraduate. You're not going to have a lot of time for working experiences. So volunteering is really kind of the best way to gain some additional experience for our MSW program and other MSW programs.
I would say probably of all the programs, research is going to be most important to the master's in psychology. It's very important. That's what we're about. We do research. It doesn't matter what area of psychology in which you have research experience. It doesn't even have to be the same area of psychology as you want to study in the master's program. But it's very, very helpful if you have already gotten some research experience as an undergraduate and some research skills. To do that, at least for the people here, I encourage people to look at the faculty members in psychology. What kind of research are they doing? Who is doing research that's of interest to you? Pick 2 or 3 of those and go talk with them about their research. It's a good idea to have read some of their research before you go talk to them to show that you're serious about being interested in this area. And if you can ask if they would be willing to let you work in their lab as a research assistant while you are an undergraduate. Related to that, it's very important to be able to write about your research. And if you have any opportunity to work on writing grants, that's also going to be viewed favorably.
Work or life or research experience is valued for the Master's in Counseling program. So the research experience in particular is not necessary. When we see it, we are impressed and we appreciate that students have worked in a research lab, but it means just as much to see that maybe a student has a part-time job working with the population they're interested in counseling, or that they have volunteered to work with that population. But I think overall, that type of work-life volunteer experience, it helps us get to know an applicant. It helps us better understand what an applicant is passionate about, and that they are serious in wanting to become a counselor and support those populations.
And I would say that in general, in IO psychology master's programs, I kind of spoke to this before, that research experience is important, that a lot of master's programs will be looking for that. But otherwise, in our program or in other programs too, they might look either for certain classwork, as I mentioned, maybe intro psych, IO psych, methods, stats. That's very common for a lot of programs. Or in our case, and in some other cases, work experience. And the work experience doesn't have to be an IO. You can't. No, we don't expect you to go be IO psychologist before you've been trained to be an IO psychologist, but just any kind of work, especially full-time work experience for a program, at least take a couple years and do that, kind of get your feet wet in the working world is really good for our program.
All right, and then our last question before we open it up for our students to ask us questions. So are there any others, so anything kind of you haven't touched on yet in terms of other skills or characteristics that you look for in applicants?
So for the Master of Social Work program, I guess I probably should have mentioned it just in this last question, but we don't score for life experience. So that is something that is a little bit different than the other programs mentioned here, than some of them. In our statement of purpose, if you tell us all about your life experience, but that doesn't directly address the prompts, then that won't get as high of a score as if you used your life experience to directly address our prompts. So something along those lines where, we don't score based on life experience. So it really is important to stick to those prompts. That is something that we look for, and it is something that we score on. So as I said earlier, in addition to kind of needing it to be a well-written essay, because we score on the writing itself, we do score on kind of how you address those prompts. So we do kind of look for those applicants who do realize kind of what we're asking in that statement of purpose and kind of how they should use what has happened throughout their life to make them realize they want to become a social worker. In that way, life experience is, fantastic to include. As far as other, skills or qualities, in addition to, being a solid writer, we look for, as I mentioned before, leadership opportunities. We look for those who do have a passion for social justice. Again, that's not something that, we don't, not all of our students go into, complete social justice, going to, some people think that's just the criminal justice system, juvenile justice. That's not what we mean by that. We just mean that you do have to want that passion for social justice to some level, still using that as a school social worker, in a long-term care facility, wherever you may be working, with individuals or groups, families, or, communities, whatever that may be. So no skills in particular, but again, we look for whatever your recommenders tell us in their letter or on the, recommendation form. So what they tell us does mean a lot. Again, it does, how well they know you matters. So we really do look for people who know you well, who can tell us a little bit about your character, and that you'll be a great social worker someday.
I think the parting thought I would leave with you is to know the program to which you're applying, have done some research to understand what they do, and demonstrate in your personal statement that you're a good fit for that. For example, I'm plowing through applications right now for the MA program, and I will read somebody's statement and they say, my goal is to be a counselor or engage in therapy of some sort, at which point I immediately refer them to counseling or social work, because we don't do any clinical classes. But the ones who are asking that have not really studied our website, because I'm trying to be pretty plain there. We can't help you if that's what you want to do. Or if, for example, you wanted to do some area of psychology that we don't have, like sports psychology. We don't have anybody who does that research. Even if you're a great applicant, if I can't help you meet your goals, then I don't want to encourage you to invest time and money in a program that's not going to get you where you want to be. So I'm looking to see, based on the letters of recommendation and the personal statement and your goals, are you a good fit with what the program can actually do?
I'm glad you brought that up. In counseling, we certainly get.
I should get a commission. I send people there all the time.
Thank you. I send people right back to you who tell me and say, I'm interested in being a psychologist. And I say, I don't know why, you're emailing me then. Let me direct you to the right person. And it's hard to forget or overlook when in a statement of purpose, for example, an applicant to our counseling program will say, I'm really passionate about this psychology program, because then we're left wondering, did they just forget to edit this from another application, or are they really confused and they don't understand that this is a counseling program? Because we just want students to end up wherever is the right fit for them. I would also encourage you to do a little research into the differences and the origins between the psychology, counseling, and social work fields to see which is the best fit for you, and where they can lead in your future if you want to be a researcher or a practitioner. And then the last thing I'd share is, I'm sure this is similar for all of our programs and others across the country. Of course, the application process, the admissions process doesn't end with the application. So that is sort of our initial cut in how we rate our applicants, but then we have interviews. And for us, they're group interviews. So we really are looking for, who are these applicants as people? Can they speak accurately and compelling ways to why they want to be a counselor? But also, do they play well with others? Do they dominate the conversation, or are they too reserved? Do they participate in the activities that we lead? At that point, it's not too competitive, but we just want to make sure that our student or that our applicants can cooperate well with others.
Great, yes, thanks. Everybody said really good stuff. I echo, going last, I'll echo again a lot of what they said. Please do your research and show that you, for whatever programs you apply to here or elsewhere, say something that shows that you know what kind of program you're applying to. And if you don't know, maybe ask a professor here who you're close to how to help you find out. So I know when I was an undergrad, I was very clueless and I didn't know how to look up a lot of this stuff, and I was very shy. But if there's somebody maybe a graduate student or a professor here, have them help you discern, because we don't mind helping with that. As far as skills in our program, we're changing, now that we're waiving the GRE, we're changing our qualitative prompts, our essay prompts, to serve as kind of questions about any data analytic experience that you have, why you want our program. Again, trying to be a little more targeted, to show that you've thought about why you want a program, and also of valuing diversity. That is not telling us how you're diverse, but just telling us that you're an essay about your willingness to work with diverse people. Both of our professional societies and obviously our nation at large, we're very concerned about inclusive workplaces and social justice and all that. And so we're adding a prompt now to tell us about, kind of how you've grown, or your thoughts about, working with, being in an inclusive work environment, or how you, would you be willing to work with diverse types of employees? Because that's what people are going to have to be able to do in the work world. So to being open to that, I guess, at this point. So those are some things probably that I hadn't mentioned.
Great. So I know I learned a lot about all of these programs. I really appreciate all of our panelists sharing really helpful information about, again, what they think makes a competitive applicant and what they're looking for. And now we're at the end of our session, and I'm just going to let you all, if you have questions, this is your time to ask. If you have a general question for everyone, or if you have, a specific question for someone here today, you can address it that way.
Hi, I have a question about the GPA stuff. So I'm actually a transfer student, and I was just wondering, do you see like the entire transcript? Because I know when I transferred to UNC Charlotte, my GPA was kind of reset. So I was just wondering how much you look into like the transcript and GPA from previous institutions for transfer students.
So I'll let our panelists chime in, but my understanding of this is you'll submit your transcripts from all the institutions that you've been to. So if you've been to one other institution, you would submit that along with your transcript from UNCC. I'll let our panelists, if you all have more to add to that question. So Dr. Shanock says, yes, that's correct. So yeah, so Katie, you would just, again, you would basically just be submitting all of those transcripts that you have from all of those institutions. All right, I have a question from Jackson to Dr. Shanock. Do you have any IO psychology research opportunities that you are working on or can recommend?
Hi, Jackson. That's a great question. So I'm not sure yet whether I do research, all of us pretty much have ongoing research labs. I'm not sure yet whether I'll be needing anybody new for next year, but depending on what you're interested in, not only in psychology, so we have lots of IO psychologists in psychology. We have Anita Blanchard, Eric Hegestead, Stephen Rogelberg, Alyssa McGonigal. You can look on our website and see we have a new faculty member, Mariana Arvin. We also have social psychologist, Amy Canavello, who does very closely related work. And then I didn't really talk about this today, but I'm also part of the organizational science PhD program, which is an interdisciplinary program. And so there are faculty members in sociology and in communication studies, and also in management that comprise our program that are also doing very closely related work-related research. So I would kind of look at the psychology department website and see who the IO faculty are, and feel free to reach out. I think, normally I would suggest going to visit them during their office hours, but we're still, online, but you could still visit them during their virtual office hours on Zoom. And just like Dr. Gaultney said, I think it was really good advice. If you find one or two that you really think you're interested in their research, read an article or two of theirs, find it at the in the library at PsycInfo, and read. And then, when you talk to them, you'll sound educated.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have a question from Sarah. So who would be the best person to email questions about the individual counseling programs and to find out ideas for getting involved in the unique communities that we might want to work with?
So if you're referring to the counseling master's programs, I oversee the master's as a whole. So I'm happy to answer questions about the admissions process or our program of study, but we do have directors for each concentrations. They're listed on our website. Brian Stair directs the clinical mental health counseling program. Taryn Mingo directs the school counseling program, and Pam Lassiter directs the addictions counseling program. And if you think the unique communities you might want to work with are related to one of those, like if you want to work with adults in clinical mental health, but there's a more specific population, the director of the concentration might be a good person to ask.
All right, Kalita, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, feel free to correct me. So who could I go to learn more about MFT master's program requirements?
I'm glad you asked. So we don't have a marriage and family therapy concentration in our master's. And I often tell applicants, if you want to be a marriage and family therapist, don't come to our program, because there are other better programs out there that specify and specialize in marriage, couples, family counseling. I will use this opportunity to advocate that anyone interested in counseling looks at and pursues a KCREP accredited program. I can put the acronym in the chat here, KCREP, and the website is kcrep.org. That's the accrediting body of our field, and we're seeing more and more that licensure boards are requiring you go to a KCREP school, so we don't want you to go to a school that's not accredited and then you can't become licensed down the road. KCREP has accreditation for marriage and family therapy programs in particular, so you could look at their website to get a head start on which program to look at.
Sounds like a good resource. And yeah, a lot of fields, if you just go to Google or something, you can hopefully find something like that will sort of have a list of different programs that you could look through, or use that as a starting point at least.
I have a quick question, probably for the counseling program. So, and it could be, I'm not sure if she's still on here, but for social work. So my daughter graduated with her MSW in 2018. So I'm now in school getting my undergrad, working adult with school all in the mix. And I know how important it was when she was in school with internships and things of that nature. How does that fit for the adult learner that's thinking about going and pursuing her master's after undergrad?
Yeah, so I can, I think you also said social work in there, so I can go first with that. But we do have a 3-year online program that is starting this summer. It used to be hybrid, but now it is fully online. It does have in-person field components in the 2nd and 3rd year of the program for 16 hours a week. But other than that, students take, between 1 to 3 courses a semester. That 3-year program is built for those who are employed, have a full-time or part-time job, and, really just can't commit to a full-time on-campus program. So that is a flexible option if you are interested in a master's in social work. That we have that 3-year program that it is, students do take the same courses, but it is just spread out across 3 years instead of compact into 2 years. So that is an option.
And the counseling program at UNC Charlotte is not usually online. It's nearly all face-to-face, but we don't have a prescribed program of study timeline. So if you need to take courses part-time, maybe 1 or 2 a semester, and take more like 3 or 4 years to complete the master's, you can. If you want to knock it out in 2 years, we have that happen all the time too. And internships, of course, are required. We have 3 clinical experiences learning to be a counselor. For our school counseling students, eventually they need to be available during the day because that's when school is in session. But for our clinical mental health and addiction counseling students, if their work schedule or family obligations require them to be available at night or during the day, they can usually find an internship site that accommodates those needs.
All right, well, we are about out of time. I thank all of you for your great questions. I had some really, really good questions today. And again, I hope that you all found this to be helpful. And again, hope you all have a great evening and thank you for joining us.